Little girl ran to Mafia boss, begging, "Please help my brother." And what they found that night would stay with them forever. She came walking out of the dark like something the city itself had tried to swallow, barefoot, bruised, clutching a stuffed bear missing an eye. She crossed the estate grounds where men with guns didn't flinch, where power was absolute and mercy had no place. Her voice shook when she spoke, but it didn't break. "Please, help my brother." Corvin Alessio had seen grown men cry, enemies beg, killers pray. But this was different. The girl wasn't running from danger. She was running toward it, dragging him with her. And when she whispered the name of the man who took her brother, a name Corvin had buried years ago, everything changed. What waits in the dark is not just evil. It is familiar. Stories like this deserve to be remembered. Subscribe and share. The girl came out of the darkness like a ghost. The estate gates had just begun to close for the night when the guards saw her, small, barefoot, filthy. Her hair hung in tangled ropes around her face, and her thin arms wrapped tight around a ragged teddy bear missing an eye. Gravel bit into her feet, but she didn't stop. She stumbled once, caught herself, and kept going. The guards reached for their weapons automatically. No one walked up to this house by accident. The towering black sedans in the driveway gleamed beneath the estate lights. Men in suits stood like statues, their expressions carved from stone. The air was still, expensive, and dangerous. Anyone with sense would have turned around. But the girl kept walking. She didn't look up until she was almost close enough to touch the polished shoes of the men before her. Her voice came out as a weak rasp at first, like she'd already said it 1,000 times. "Please." She swallowed, breath shaking. "Please, help my brother." The guards exchanged looks, confusion, annoyance, suspicion. The house behind them was not the kind of place one came seeking help. It was the home of Corvin Alessio, the man half the city whispered about, the man the other half owed their silence to. Corvin didn't help people. He bought them, bent them, broke them, or buried them. One of the guards stepped forward. "Kid, you need to leave. This is private. Stop." The voice cut through the air like a blade. The guards turned at once. Corvin Alessio stepped out from the open doors of the estate. Tall, broad-shouldered, silver threaded through his beard, but no weakness in the lines of his face. His suit was black, immaculate, tailored like armor. His gaze, dark, cold, unreadable, was the kind of gaze men avoided and children felt in their bones. He didn't look surprised. He didn't look merciful. He simply looked. The girl lifted her eyes to him. Her face was streaked with dirt and dried tears. Someone had grabbed her hard enough to bruise both wrists. Her teddy bear's fur was gray with dust. She held it to her chest as if it were the last thing in the world that belonged to her. "Please," she whispered again. "They took him." "My brother. They took all of us. But I got away. I ran. I ran because someone told me you make bad men afraid." Silence rippled outward like water. Corvin's men shifted uneasily. This was wrong. Children did not come here. Children never came here. Corvin walked toward her, slow, deliberate. His footsteps were quiet on the gravel. He stopped in front of her, not too close, not looming, simply present. "What is your name?" he asked. His voice was calm, too calm, the kind that could precede either comfort or execution. "Mira," she breathed. Her fingers tightened on the bear. Her lip trembled, but she didn't look away. "And your brother?" Corvin asked. "Eldon," she whispered. "They took him. They took him and others. I heard them say they were going to sell them. To a man named—" Her voice shook. Oren Vale. At that name, something in the air changed. The guards stiffened. Anton, Corvin's second in command, went still as marble. Corvin's jaw didn't move, but the temperature of the night dropped. Oren Vale was supposed to be dead. The girl didn't understand the silence, only the fear behind it. "I didn't know where else to go," Mira said, voice breaking. "Someone said you were a monster. But monsters scare other monsters away." Her knees buckled. Corvin caught her before she hit the ground, not gently, not affectionately, but with certainty, as if dropping her was not an option. He crouched, bringing himself level with her without softening a single edge of who he was. His presence did not grow warmer. The world simply arranged itself around him. "Mira," he said, low, controlled. "Look at me." She did. And in that moment, the girl who had run until her lungs burned and her feet bled finally stopped running. "I will ask you one question," Corvin said. "Answer carefully." She nodded, shoulders shaking. "Can you take me to where they are?" Her breath caught. Then, "Yes." No hesitation, just terror and love. Corvin stood, lifting Mira into his arms with one smooth motion. The teddy bear dangled from her hand, swinging slightly as she leaned against him. Anton stepped forward immediately. "Corvin, it could be a setup, a trap. We don't know who else is there. We don't know what waits." Corvin didn't look at him. "If a child runs to my door for protection," he said, voice quiet enough to make every man in the courtyard tense, "then we go." No one argued, not because they agreed, but because no one contradicted Corvin Alessio when his voice sounded like that. Engines turned over. Black SUVs lit up the driveway with harsh beams. Doors opened. Weapons were checked, not loudly, not sloppily. Every movement was practiced, efficient, deadly. Corvin settled Mira in the back seat beside him. She curled inward, small hands clutching the teddy bear so tightly the seams strained. For a moment, she looked too light, too breakable. Corvin rested a hand, not soft, not reassuring, but steady, on the back of the seat beside her. She breathed a little easier. As the gates began to open, Anton lowered his voice beside Corvin. "Why her?" Corvin didn't turn his head. "She ran," he said. Anton frowned. "And?" Corvin's gaze stayed forward on the dark road beyond the estate. "And no one runs that far unless the world has already failed them." The SUV rolled out into the night. Behind them, the gates closed like a jaw snapping shut. Ahead of them, darkness waited. And somewhere inside that darkness, children and Oren Vale. Corvin did not clench his fists. He didn't need to. The promise had already been made. If you're enjoying this story, don't forget to subscribe, like the video, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Your support helps us keep these stories alive. And trust me, the best part is yet to come. Now let's get back to it. The convoy slipped through the city like a silent blade, black SUVs cutting through the warm glow of street lamps and polished storefronts. Mira sat in the back seat beside Corvin, small and rumpled against the smooth leather interior. Her teddy bear rested in her lap, its threadbare face pressed to her chest as if it were the only anchor she had left. She didn't speak. She didn't cry. She just held on. Corvin didn't look at her directly, but he watched her in the reflection of the window. The rise and fall of her shoulders, the way she blinked too slowly, the way her eyes stared but didn't focus. A child who had seen too much and had run too far. The car was quiet except for the hum of the engine and the occasional whisper of tires on pavement. Anton sat in the passenger seat up front, jaw tight, scanning the route on his tablet. Anton had been with Corvin for 12 years, sharp mind, sharper instincts. He didn't speak unless something mattered. "They'll know we're coming," Anton murmured, tapping the map with 2 fingers. If Oren is alive, if this isn't just rumor, he'll have eyes out. Lookouts, probably rotations. Corvin didn't answer. He didn't have to. Behind them, in the second vehicle, Rose rode with his eyes always half open, watching everything, speaking to no one. Rose was a shadow in human form, pale eyes and a stillness that made people uneasy. He noticed things others didn't. He moved before danger named itself. And in the third car, Merrick. Broad-shouldered, scarred knuckles. A soldier before he became something else, something forged by violence and held together only by loyalty. Merrick didn't like patience or silence. He liked problems with immediate solutions, preferably loud ones, a triangle of mind, instinct, and force. Corvin's weapons, arranged exactly as he needed them. As the cars moved farther from the polished heart of the city, the landscape began to twist and decay. Neon lights gave way to flickering bulbs and rusted metal signage. Buildings sagged under their own walls. Windows were shattered or nailed shut. The air changed, thicker, heavier, tasting faintly of chemical waste and cold iron. The Forgotten District. Mira finally broke the silence. Her voice was faint but steady. They took us from the playground. Her fingers curled into the teddy bear's fur. It was supposed to be a picnic day. The other kids were laughing. Eldon was holding the juice box too tight. He always spills when he gets excited. Corvin didn't react outwardly, but Anton glanced into the rearview mirror, and something flickered in his eyes. Mira continued. There was a van. White, no plates. One man got out, then two. They said nothing. They just grabbed us. Her throat tightened, forcing the words through. The parents tried to fight, but the men had metal pipes and knives, and no one expected anything. It happened too fast. She swallowed, eyes glassy and far away. They didn't yell. They didn't rush. They just did it, like they had done it before. We were all put in the van, doors locked. Eldon cried. I told him to be brave. I told him I would keep him safe. Her voice wavered. But I didn't. Corvin turned his head slightly, studying her. Not as prey or pawn, but as someone making confessions to survive the memory. You ran, he said. That is not failure. Her lips trembled. I waited until they fell asleep. One of the guards. I watched him. I watched him breathe. I counted. I waited. And then I crawled past him. I didn't breathe. I didn't cry. I didn't make a sound. I didn't even take the blanket they gave us. I just ran. Corvin nodded once. Not approval. Recognition. The kind soldiers once gave to other survivors. You did what most grown men wouldn't, he said. Mira blinked rapidly, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. But Eldon is still there. Corvin looked forward, his voice low and certain. Not for long. The convoy crossed a bridge into a region where streetlights were scarce. Power lines drooped like nooses. Warehouses rose ahead, great hunched silhouettes against the smog-dimmed sky. A low fog clung to the ground like it was afraid to be touched. Rose's voice crackled in over the intercom. Movement in the alleys. 3 figures watching, not approaching. Scouts, Anton confirmed. We're getting close. Merrick's voice followed. Want me to handle them? No, Corvin said. There was no warmth in the word, no softness, but there was patience, dangerous patience. If we scare them, Corvin continued, they'll alert the others. We go in quiet. We see before we strike. Because Corvin Alessio never walked into a fight blind, he approached violence the way a general approached war, mapped, structured, unavoidable. He had buried too many friends who thought brute strength was enough. The cars rolled to a stop a full block from the warehouse district. Engines went silent. Doors opened slowly. No slams, no noise. The men moved like they were carved from shadow, purposeful, focused. And Orenvale, Before we continue, take a moment to subscribe and like this video. It helps more people discover stories like this one. And tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Now, take a deep breath, because what happens next will change everything. They approached the warehouse on foot, the night pressing close around them. The building loomed ahead, corrugated metal rusted in streaks, windows boarded or shattered, a single weak bulb flickering above the side entrance like a dying star. The silence here was too deep. Not the stillness of night, but the kind that followed after fear had already done its work. Corvin halted his men with a small gesture, barely more than the shift of a hand. Anton scanned the door. Rose checked the upper windows. Marek flexed his fingers once, cracking them quietly, impatient. Corvin listened. No voices, no footsteps, no guard dogs, no alarms. But there was breathing. Not adult breathing. Lighter, thinner, many of them. Corvin nodded. Anton moved forward first, picking the lock with clean, precise movements. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. Years of working at Corvin's side made words unnecessary. The door clicked open. Rose went in low. Marek followed high. Corvin entered last, carrying Mira, who clung to his jacket but didn't make a sound. The air inside was stale, damp, heavy with something close to rot. A smell like old water trapped in closed spaces. Corvin's shoes pressed into dirt and concrete dust. Then the dark gave shape to the room. Rows. Rows of cages, not metal cages, makeshift ones. Welded iron fencing twisted and bolted into square pens, each barely large enough for a child to sit in. Thin blankets thrown in like scraps, buckets in the corners, no padding, no softness. And inside, children. Dozens. Some sitting up, some curled in on themselves, some with eyes open but unfocused, some staring at nothing, as though looking too long at the world had already broken them. None spoke. Silence hung like a second prison. Mira stiffened in Corvin's arms, breath quick and shallow. Her fingers dug into his suit, trembling. Her voice came out as a whisper, barely formed. Eldon. Corvin looked down at her, then to the cages. She squirmed, leaning forward, eyes scanning frantically. Corvin lowered her to stand but kept his hand on her shoulder. Her small, bare feet touched the cold concrete, and she took one step, then another. Then she saw him. The boy was in the third row, fourth cage, knees pulled to his chest, arms wrapped around them. His head rested forward, chin touching his knees. His hair hung in lank strands. His clothes, once a soft yellow shirt with small embroidered suns, were now gray with dirt. Eldon. Mira's voice cracked, louder now, breaking the silence. The boy didn't move at first. Then slowly his head lifted. His eyes were hollow. But when he saw her, when recognition hit, something inside him surged. Mira! His voice was hoarse, barely sound, and then his face crumpled. Mira ran. She didn't stop to think. She didn't wait for permission. She ran barefoot across concrete, tripping once but catching herself, reaching the cage and gripping the bars with shaking hands. Eldon. Eldon, I came back. I came back. He pressed his face to the bars. His fingers reached through and touched hers. Corvin stepped to her side and placed his hand over the lock. He didn't break it with force. He didn't yank. He pulled a slim set of picks from his coat and worked silently, quickly. The lock clicked open. Mira threw her arms around Eldon the instant the cage opened, and the boy collapsed into her, sobbing into her shoulder. She held him tight, whispering his name over and over. Marek exhaled, a harsh sound of disbelief. How many? Rose counted quietly. At least 23 visible here, potentially more in adjacent rooms. Anton moved down the line, checking cage latches, examining locks, looking for alarms. He shook his head. They didn't expect anyone to come for them. No alert systems. No guards inside. They don't expect interference. Corvin's jaw tightened. Because the men running this place believed no one cared. He looked at the children again, faces sunken from dehydration, lips cracked, limbs thin. Some had bruises, some had rope burns, some stared like their souls had already stepped somewhere else to survive. Corvin had seen prisoners. He had seen war. He had seen what men did when they thought no one would ever hold them accountable. But this was a wound in the world. His face didn't change. His voice didn't change. His breathing didn't change. But something deep in his chest shifted, tightened, solidified. "Rose, Marek," he said quietly. "Begin releasing them. Slowly, no sudden movements. They will be afraid." The men obeyed immediately. Rose knelt beside the nearest cage, moving with the same gentleness one would use to approach a wounded animal. Marek, for once, did not appear ready to break something. He softened his posture, his voice low and rough when he said, "You're safe now." "We've got you. We're getting you out." One child flinched. Another stared. Another began to cry. Corvin watched them all. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. Then, a voice slid out from the darkness at the far end of the warehouse. A voice that did not belong to a child. "Well," it said, smooth and amused. "I can't say I expected you to be the one to find me." The children froze. Mira tensed. Corvin lifted his head. From the shadows between rusted support beams and broken machinery, a man stepped forward. Slim, clean, composed. His hair tied back. His suit immaculate despite the rot around him. His hands folded behind his back as if welcoming guests to a gallery. Oren Vale. He smiled, not with joy, not with warmth, but with the quiet pleasure of someone who has been waiting. "Hello, Corvin." Corvin did not blink. "Oren." Oren's smile widened. "You came all this way for children. You, of all people." His gaze flicked to Mira and Eldon. "Oh," he murmured, "you brought the runaway home." Mira reached behind her without looking, fingers clutching Corvin's coat. Corvin stepped forward. Not fast, not loud, not weak, just inevitable. Oren spread his hands. "Tell me, Corvin!" "Are you here to save them?" His voice echoed in the dark. "Or are you here to atone?" The warehouse went still. The children held their breath. And Corvin Alessio did not move. But the world around him began to shift. Oren walked closer, the dim hanging light swaying above him, casting his shadow long across the concrete floor. He looked perfectly at ease here, like the warehouse was a stage built for him, and Corvin had finally arrived to take his place in the scene. "Don't look so grim," Oren said lightly, as though greeting an old friend at a dinner table instead of standing among cages of starving children. "If anything, I'm flattered. You still remember how to find me." Corvin remained still. His men did not move either, but they watched, breath steady, fingers resting near potential violence. Mira stepped back behind Corvin, pulling Eldon with her. Her small hands shook, gripping his coat. Eldon's breathing was sharp and frightened, but silent. Corvin spoke, voice calm and level. "You're going to step away from the children, and you're going to surrender." Oren laughed. Not a bark. Not hysterical. Just amused. "Surrender?" he repeated, placing a hand over his chest. "To you?" "No, Corvin. That was never our dynamic. You command them." He gestured toward Anton, Rose, Marek. "But you never commanded me." Corvin's eyes narrowed a fraction. "You were barely more than a street rat when I found you." "Yes," Oren said, smiling wider. "And now look at me. You gave me everything I am." He stepped closer, boots whispering over dust. "You trained me, fed me, sharpened me, molded me into your perfect blade. A man who could walk into a room and never need to raise his voice because the room already understood it belonged to him. His eyes glinted. And here we are. You walk into my room. Marek shifted his weight, but Corvin lifted one hand, barely a flick, and Marek stilled immediately. Oren's smile faltered just slightly. Still loyal, I see. You always did choose well. He glanced toward Mira and Eldon. Even now. Mira pressed Eldon closer to her, shielding him with her small body. That one, Oren said softly, tilting his head at Mira. She has spirit. Not the broken kind, the sharp kind, the kind that remembers who hurt her. His tone was almost admiring. Corvin's voice was quiet, but the warehouse seemed to hold its breath. Do not speak to her. Oren blinked once, and his smile returned, slower this time, more thoughtful. There it is, he murmured. The edge beneath the control. He took a few steps to the side, pacing between cages like this was a leisurely conversation. You taught me that, Corvin. That power is not in shouting or striking. Power is in presence, in being the calmest man in the room, the one who never raises his voice, because he does not need to. He tapped a cage bar as he walked past it. These children know it too. They know exactly who decides their world, who holds the key, who ends their suffering or extends it. Corvin's jaw tightened. You turned my lessons into cruelty. Oren stopped. Slowly, deliberately, he faced him. No, he said quietly. I followed your lessons. Exactly as they were given. The words hung in the air like something poisonous. You taught me to treat people as leverage, to calculate outcomes, to remove obstacles without hesitation, to never let emotion interfere with purpose. He smiled again, small, razor-thin. And what purpose is greater than profit? Corvin stepped forward once. Mira's hand tightened around his coat. Eldon hid his face in her shoulder. You became a monster, Corvin said. Oren raised a brow. I became you. The silence that followed was not fragile. It was heavy, solid. A stone dropped into deep water. Anton's breathing slowed, controlled. Rose's eyes flicked between shadows. Marek's fingers curled into fists. Mira whispered, voice shaky but determined. He's lying. Corvin looked down at her for only a moment, and that moment was enough. Oren saw it, and something in his expression shifted. I see, Oren murmured. You found something to protect. That explains everything. Then his voice dropped to something softer, something dangerous. You're weak now. Marek moved first. Not to strike, just to step. But that tiny shift was enough. Shapes moved in the higher rafters. Boots scraped lightly over metal beams. Gunmetal glinted in the dark. Oren hadn't been alone. Tsk, Anton said under his breath. We have company. Corvin didn't turn, didn't look. I know. Oren spread his arms slightly. You think I didn't know you would come eventually? You always chase the loose ends, always return to unfinished business. His smile was nearly gentle. I prepared for you, Corvin. I always have. Rose's hand slid to the grip of his weapon. Corvin spoke quietly, so quietly Mira almost didn't hear it. No killing. Not with the children here. Marek's jaw tightened, frustration visible, but he nodded. Oren chuckled. I admire your restraint. Truly, you've changed. But tell me something. Does change erase what came before? Do the bones under the foundation disappear because you decorate the house? He stepped closer again, stopping just out of arm's reach. You can kill me, he said, or you can walk away with your children. But you cannot have both. Mira stepped in front of Eldon again, chin trembling. but raised. Corvin spoke, voice like stone. "You misunderstand." Oren tilted his head. Corvin continued, every word precise. "There is no choice." He lifted his hand. Anton, Rose. Marek moved in unison. Oren's men dropped from the rafters. The warehouse erupted, not into noise but into motion. Silent, efficient, terrifying. Corvin moved first, straight toward Oren. Oren's smile remained, even as the fight closed around them like jaws. "You still think this is about them?" Oren whispered. Corvin didn't answer. He didn't need to, because the truth was already written in the way he stepped forward, deathly calm, inevitable. This was not vengeance, this was reckoning. The warehouse burst into motion without a single gunshot. Corvin's order, no loud weapons, hung in the air like an unbreakable law. The children were already trembling, every sound a threat. So the violence unfolded quiet and close, where breath and bone and will decided the outcome. Anton moved first, slipping behind a descending attacker and driving a blade upward under the rib cage. Clean, quick, a hand clamped over the man's mouth to catch the sound. Marek swept low, hooking another man's legs and dragging him to the ground, his elbow crashing into a jaw before the scream could leave the throat. Rose struck with the efficiency of someone who had lived his whole life in battles that required silence, his motions almost gentle in their precision. Oren's men fought with noise in their eyes, desperation, frenzy, hyenas that had tasted blood and feared losing it. Corvin stepped through the chaos like a man walking through rain, every movement controlled, every step deliberate. He didn't look rushed. He didn't look angry. He looked inevitable. Oren met him halfway, lips pulled back in a humorless grin. "I wondered," he murmured, rolling his sleeves up as if preparing for a dinner rather than a fight. "After all these years, do you still bleed?" Corvin didn't answer. Words were for men who needed meaning. Corvin needed none. Their first collision was quiet. No roar, no scream, just the dull, sharp thud of two bodies meeting with force. Oren moved quicker than memory would have predicted, his strikes sharp, fast, practiced. Corvin blocked each one, redirecting instead of absorbing, letting Oren burn his strength quickly. Oren laughed, breathless. "Oh, you're still holding back. Still pretending you're better than what you are." Corvin's fist answered. The hit sent Oren stumbling, not far, but far enough that his smile broke. Mira watched from behind a stack of crates, Eldon pressed so tightly against her that she could feel his heartbeat through his ribs. Mira didn't cry. She didn't look away. She watched, gripping Eldon with both arms, her teeth clenched hard enough to ache. She had survived too much already to hide. Corvin and Oren circled each other, though Corvin did not circle. He simply existed in the space, all presence, all shadow. Oren, by contrast, shifted, darted, searched for advantage. "You think saving them makes you different?" Oren hissed, gesturing to the cages around them. "You taught me the world has only predators and prey. I simply accepted the truth. You're the coward who couldn't." Corvin's strike came so fast the air barely noticed. Oren hit the concrete hard, but he got up. Of course he got up. He had been shaped by Corvin. Across the warehouse, a guard lunged toward Mira and Eldon. Rose moved before Mira even gasped, appearing like a shadow forming out of the dark, his arm locking around the man's throat, lowering him silently to the floor. Mira met Rose's eyes. He nodded once. She held Eldon tighter. Oren spat blood onto the ground, wiped his mouth with the back of his hand, and smiled again. Wild now, desperate around the edges. "You made me unstoppable," he said. "You just never expected the weapon to point back at you." Corvin stepped forward, not rushing, measuring. "Not unstoppable," he said. He caught Oren's wrist mid-strike. "Just unrestrained." He twisted. Bone cracked. Oren screamed, short, shocked, cut off just as quickly when Corvin slammed him against a support beam. The impact echoed through the warehouse, dull like distant thunder. Oren's knees buckled, and Corvin let him fall. Mira stared. Corvin never looked away from Oren. "You did this!" Oren panted, clutching his ruined arm. "You taught me to cut the world open, to take what no one else would protect." Corvin's expression didn't change. "You misunderstood," he said quietly. Oren laughed, choked, bitter. "I understood perfectly. Strength wins, weakness dies. Purpose matters more than innocence." He lifted his chin with shattered dignity. "I am your lesson, Corvin." Corvin lowered to one knee, facing him at eye level. "You are my failure." Oren's smile faltered, not from pain, but from something worse. Recognition. His voice wavered for the first time. "You can kill me," he whispered, "but you can't erase what you made." The children around them were silent, watching, listening, breathing. Corvin's face remained calm. He didn't snarl, he didn't rage, he didn't defend himself. He simply acted. His hand moved once, precise, final, ending Oren's breath before cruelty could take root again in his voice. No spectacle, no flourish, just completion. The warehouse went still. Only the sound of quiet sobbing. Children, slowly realizing the danger was passing, filled the space. Corvin rose. Marek wiped blood from his knuckles. Anton checked the perimeter again, ensuring no more enemies were hiding. Rose stood guard near Mira and Eldon, silent and unmoving, a shield. Mira looked at Corvin. His face was unreadable. His shoulders did not slump in relief or regret. But something in him had altered. Not a breaking, a turning. He walked to Mira and Eldon, lowering himself so he was level with them. Mira's eyes were wide, not afraid of him, but afraid of the world that made him necessary. Corvin held out his hand. Slow. Steady. Eldon hesitated, then reached out, small fingers curling around his. Mira exhaled, shaky, but her chin lifted. "What happens now?" she asked, voice tiny, but there. Corvin looked back at the cages, at the destroyed ghosts of childhood inside them. His voice was quiet. "Now," he said, "we take them home. Not to a palace, not to a dream, but to safety, to warmth, to a place where they would be seen." The children watched him, not with fear, but with something fragile. Hope. Corvin turned to his men. "Begin preparing transport." Gentle hands, slow movements. "We don't leave anyone behind." They obeyed instantly. Mira squeezed Eldon's hand, and Eldon leaned into her, breathing steady now. Corvin stood among the children, once symbols of his past, now the shape of his future. The war was not over, but its direction had changed. Here, amid rusted cages and broken lessons, Corvin Alessio chose who he would become next. The warehouse was still echoing with the aftermath of movement, though no one spoke. The children were gathered in a loose cluster near the center of the floor, thin arms wrapped around thinner bodies, tired eyes darting to every sound. The cages stood open now, empty like the shells of something terrible that had finally died. But the danger hadn't passed. Not really. Corvin's men were already sweeping the perimeter. Anton spoke quietly into his earpiece, voice low and precise. Marek dragged unconscious guards into a far corner, binding their hands with zip ties from his belt. Rose stood by the main entrance like a carved statue, every sense sharpened outward. Corvin looked at the children, their bruised knees, dry lips, faces hollow from hunger. These were not children who had been lost. They had been discarded. Mira stayed close to him, one hand gripping Eldon's, the other clutching Corvin's coat. Her small face was streaked with dirt and tears, but she was steady. Eldon, though, had gone quiet. Too quiet. He breathed fast, eyes wide and unfocused, the kind of silence that came after long fear. Corvin knelt in front of him, lowering himself slowly, giving the boy time to understand that the ground would not move, that no one was reaching to grab him. Eldon's eyes flicked up, small, frightened, searching. Corvin didn't speak at first. He simply waited. Then quietly, "You're safe now." Eldon blinked. His lips parted like he wanted to speak, but only air came out. Mira squeezed his hand. "It's okay," she whispered. "He listens." Corvin nodded once, not for authority, but acknowledgement. "Take your time," he said. "We're not leaving without you." Mira exhaled a shaky breath. Eldon leaned toward her, resting his forehead on her shoulder. His small fingers released Corvin's coat, but his hand remained close, near enough to reach if he needed to. That was enough for now. Corvin stood and turned to his men. "No police," he said. Anton didn't question it. "Understood." "Corruption," Marek muttered. "Too deep to risk," Corvin replied. "The moment we make a report, these children disappear again. Buried in paperwork, sold back into the system that let them vanish." Rose's voice rumbled quietly, barely above silence. "So we become the system." Corvin looked at him. "Yes." It was not a vow of pride. It was a sentence pronounced over himself. "Anton, call Dr. Ilara. Tell her how many we're dealing with and what conditions they're in." Anton nodded, already dialing. "Marek, blankets, food, water, small portions at first. No sudden changes. They can't eat too fast." Marek grunted and moved. "Rose," Corvin continued, "secure transport. The safe house on Cullen Street. The one with the reinforced lower rooms. Prepare it." Rose left without a word. Mira tugged on Corvin's sleeve. Her voice was soft, shaky, fragile. "We're really leaving?" Corvin looked down at her. "Yes." "And Eldon comes with me?" "Always." Her shoulders eased, not relaxed, not yet, but the line of tension in her neck loosened. She stayed beside him as though any distance at all felt unsafe. Corvin knew that kind of attachment. He had seen it in soldiers, in survivors, in orphans who recognized another orphan even if they had never spoken. It was not dependency. It was recognition. The process of moving the children began slowly. They were weak, dehydrated, some too scared to stand. Corvin's men carried them gently. No sudden movements, no raised voices, no urgency that could be mistaken for threat. Dr. Ilara arrived within minutes, her coat flaring behind her as she crossed the warehouse floor. She didn't gasp or cry or freeze. She simply knelt beside the first child and checked their pulse, her hands swift and sure. "These children are severely malnourished," she said. "Some have bruising, restraining injuries. Several are showing signs of prolonged stress and dehydration. They need warm spaces, slow refeeding, and consistent reassurance." Her tone was neutral, but her eyes were wet. She moved on to Eldon and Mira. Mira refused to let go of Eldon, even as the doctor examined him. Ilara didn't try to separate them. "There is no infection at the moment," she murmured. "Just exhaustion and fear." Fear was harder to treat than wounds. One by one, children were wrapped in blankets Marek distributed from the vehicles. They drank warm water in small sips. They held the blankets tightly around themselves like they were afraid someone would take even that. Corvin watched them. 28 children. 28 lives now in his hands. No police, no state, no safe surrender back to the world. This responsibility was not a role he had chosen, but it was a role that had fallen to him. Mira looked up at him again. "You came," she whispered, as if the realization was just settling in. "You really came." Corvin didn't smile, but he did place his hand gently, just for a moment, over her hair. Lead us, she said. Please. Don't leave us here. There was no hesitation in his reply. I won't. The convoy left the warehouse in silence. Black cars and dark SUVs rolled through back roads and old industrial streets. No headlights, no sirens. Only the hum of engines and the quiet breathing of children bundled in blankets beside trained killers who now moved like guardians. They arrived at the safe house, a large abandoned townhouse that Corvin had once used for weapon storage. The lower floors had reinforced walls. The upper floors had room for sleeping, bathing, resting. Not a home, but safe. For now, safety was enough. The children were brought inside. Elara and Anton guided them upstairs, speaking in soft tones. Mira stayed beside Corvin, Eldon tucked under her arm like a promise she would never break. Only when every child was inside, only when blankets covered every small body and Elara was satisfied, did Corvin step back outside. The night was cold, his breath fogged in the air. And for the first time in years, something inside him trembled, not with fear, not with doubt, with weight, responsibility. Anton joined him on the doorstep. You've taken on a war, Anton said quietly. Corvin didn't look away from the sky. Yes, Anton nodded once. Then we'll fight it. Not a vow of loyalty, a shared understanding. Corvin closed his eyes for one slow breath. The warehouse had been the end of one road. This was the beginning of another, a harder one, a necessary one. Behind him, Mira and Eldon slept side by side on a warm blanket, Mira's hand never letting go of her brother's. Corvin watched over them until dawn. The move to the estate happened without announcement or ceremony. Corvin did not explain the decision to his men. He did not draft a speech, did not show hesitation. One morning, after confirming the children had survived their first night in the safe house, he simply said, "We're moving them." The West Wing. Anton blinked. Marek stared. Rose didn't react at all, but the pause in his breath was noticeable, and for him that was equivalent to shock. The Alessio estate was a fortress of quiet power. High walls, black stone, iron gates heavy enough to stop a tank. A place built for strategy and control, not softness. The West Wing had not been used in years, its doors sealed, its halls covered with dust thick enough to write a name in. Corvin had once avoided that wing. Too many memories lived there. But now it would hold something new. Mira walked beside him as they entered the estate grounds, small hand wrapped tightly around Eldon's. Both children wore freshly washed clothes that hung a little too loose, sleeves too long. Mira clutched her teddy bear, sewn back together in uneven patches by Marek the night before. Eldon leaned against her, eyes clearer now, though still wary. The others followed behind, carrying blankets, water, and boxes of quiet necessities. No flashing lights, no sound outside the quiet shuffle of feet. Even the servants stayed away, instructed not to speak unless spoken to. The West Wing doors opened with a groaning sigh, as though the building itself was waking. Rooms were aired, curtains drawn open, windows unlatched to let sunlight in. Dust sheets pulled away to reveal furniture that had been untouched for years. It took hours. No one complained. Not because they understood, but because Corvin did not allow space for questioning. His will was gravity. They moved under it. Anton organized room assignments. Rose secured windows and exits. Marek hauled furniture, grumbling under his breath but refusing help. Dr. Elara inspected each child before allowing them to settle. Mira and Eldon were given adjoining rooms, small, warm, lit softly so shadows wouldn't seem threatening. Their doors were across the hall from Corvin's. That detail was deliberate, Mira noticed. For now, safety was enough. The children were brought inside. Elara and Anton guided them upstairs, speaking in soft tones. Mira stayed beside Corvin, Eldon tucked under her arm like a promise she would never break. Only when every child was inside, only when blankets covered every small body and Alara was satisfied, did Corvin step back outside. The night was cold. His breath fogged in the air, and for the first time in years, something inside him trembled, not with fear, not with doubt, with weight, responsibility. Anton joined him on the doorstep. "You've taken on a war," Anton said quietly. Corvin didn't look away from the sky. "Yes," Anton nodded once. "Then we'll fight it." Not a vow of loyalty, a shared understanding. Corvin closed his eyes for one slow breath. The warehouse had been the end of one road. This was the beginning of another, a harder one, a necessary one. Behind him, Mira and Eldon slept side by side on a warm blanket, Mira's hand never letting go of her brother's. Corvin watched over them until dawn. The move to the estate happened without announcement or ceremony. Corvin did not explain the decision to his men. He did not draft a speech, did not show hesitation. One morning, after confirming the children had survived their first night in the safe house, he simply said, "We're moving them." The West Wing. Anton blinked. Marek stared. Roast didn't react at all, but the pause in his breath was noticeable, and for him that was equivalent to shock. The Alessio estate was a fortress of quiet power. High walls, black stone, iron gates heavy enough to stop a tank. A place built for strategy and control, not softness. The West Wing had not been used in years, its doors sealed, its halls covered with dust thick enough to write a name in. Corvin had once avoided that wing. Too many memories lived there, but now it would hold something new. Mira walked beside him as they entered the estate grounds, small hand wrapped tightly around Eldon's. Both children wore freshly washed clothes that hung a little too loose, sleeves too long. Mira clutched her teddy bear, sewn back together in uneven patches by Marek the night before. Eldon leaned against her, eyes clearer now, though still wary. The others followed behind, carrying blankets, water, and boxes of quiet necessities. No flashing lights, no sound outside the quiet shuffle of feet. Even the servants stayed away, instructed not to speak unless spoken to. The West Wing doors opened with a groaning sigh, as though the building itself was waking. Rooms were aired, curtains drawn open, windows unlatched to let sunlight in, dust sheets pulled away to reveal furniture that had been untouched for years. It took hours. No one complained, not because they understood, but because Corvin did not allow space for questioning. His will was gravity. They moved under it. Anton organized room assignments. Rose secured windows and exits. Marek hauled furniture, grumbling under his breath but refusing help. Dr. Alara inspected each child before allowing them to settle. Mira and Eldon were given adjoining rooms, small, warm, lit softly, so shadows wouldn't seem threatening. Their doors were across the hall from Corvin's. That detail was deliberate, Mira noticed. She said nothing, but when she looked at him there was something in her eyes. Not trust, not yet. Something quieter. Recognition, perhaps. The first night, Mira woke screaming. It was not loud, not dramatic, just a sharp, choked sound, the kind that broke its way out from somewhere deep. Corvin was already awake when he heard it. He crossed the hallway without thought. Mira sat upright in her bed, chest heaving, eyes wide and unfocused. Eldon was asleep in the next room, his breathing steady. Corvin sat slowly, on the edge of Mira's bed, making sure she saw him, recognized him, understood she was not back in the warehouse or the dark. She reached for him before she could think. Her small hand wrapped around his wrist. Corvin didn't move to embrace her. He simply stayed. Time passed like that. Quiet, steady, patient. Mira's breathing slowed. The trembling eased. Her fingers loosened. She lay back down, eyelids heavy. "Are we safe here?" she whispered. Corvin did not lie. "You are safe with me?" Her eyes closed. She slept. He remained seated beside her until morning. Eldon took longer to speak. Trauma often sealed words inside children. Corvin understood silence better than anyone. He didn't push, didn't ask questions, didn't coax. He simply existed in proximity. Sometimes sitting near Eldon while he played with blocks on the rug. Sometimes standing in the same room, not speaking, just letting the boy learn the shape of safety. Days passed before it happened. Corvin was in the West Wing common room, reviewing documents at a low table, while Eldon stacked wooden blocks into uneven towers. Mira sat nearby, drawing the outline of something that looked like the warehouse door. Only now, sunlight streamed through it. Eldon dropped a block. It clattered across the floor and rolled near Corvin's hand. The boy froze. Corvin picked it up, held it out. Eldon looked at the block, then at Corvin. Then, barely louder than a breath, he whispered, "Thank you." Corvin did not smile, but something in his chest shifted, soft, unfamiliar, careful. "You're welcome," he replied. Mira's pencil paused mid-line. Her eyes shimmered, but she kept drawing. The estate began to change, slowly, almost imperceptibly. Hallways once silent now carried the soft patter of small feet. Curtains once drawn to keep the world out were now tied back to let morning light spill through. Marek built a swing set in the old vineyard courtyard, complaining the entire time, but adjusting the ropes 3 times to make sure they wouldn't fray. Rose installed nightlights along the hallways, silent, warm pools of glow so no child would wake into darkness. Anton coordinated deliveries, crates of fresh bread, fruits, books, warm bedding. His voice, always composed, softened when he spoke to the children. Servants whispered to one another in disbelief. The Alessio estate, home of the ghost, the man whose name could hush a room, now housed laughter. Small laughter, cautious laughter, but real. And Corvin? He moved differently now, not gentler, not softer, but purposeful, no longer carving his life to keep the world out, now shaping the world within his walls to hold what had been broken. One evening, as the sun dipped below the estate walls, Mira stood beside Corvin at the balcony. Eldon was in the courtyard below, stacking stones with Rose watching him, hands clasped behind his back in something very close to fondness. Mira hugged her teddy bear close. "You didn't have to save us," she said. Corvin watched the horizon. "No," he agreed. "I didn't." She looked up at him. "So, why did you?" Corvin exhaled slowly. The answer was not something he had spoken before. "For a long time," he said, "I built walls to keep the world from touching me. I believed distance was strength. But distance only prevents harm if there is nothing worth protecting." Mira considered that, brow furrowing, not because she didn't understand, but because she understood too well. She leaned her head lightly against his arm. "Are we worth protecting?" Corvin looked down at her, small, solemn, bruised by the world, but still standing. "Yes," he said, "you are." The West Wing was quiet as dusk settled, but not empty. It held life, it held warmth. It held a promise unspoken but alive in every breath. This place, once a fortress, was becoming a sanctuary. Not because Corvin Alessio had planned to change, but because 2 children walked into his life carrying the weight of a world that had failed them. And he refused to let that be the end of their story. Rumors spread like smoke, thin at first, drifting through the city's undercurrents, then catching, thickening, taking shape. The ghost has children in his house. No one said Corvin Alessio's name aloud unless they had to. People spoke of him by titles, by myth, by reputation. The ghost, the quiet wolf, the one who doesn't need to raise his voice. And now the whispers added something new. He's keeping children. They run in his halls. The West Wing lights are on again. Some allies heard and leaned back in their leather chairs, breathing out laughter. Corvin finally went soft. Some enemies heard and smiled slow. A kingdom with children in it is easier to burn. But those who truly understood power, those who had felt the weight of Corvin's gaze, did not laugh. They waited. They watched. The city leaned in, listening for the next move. Inside the estate, the changes were subtle but undeniable. Children's footsteps echoed down once silent corridors. Small shoes left faint scuffs in marble floors. Books were read aloud. Windows that had been shuttered were now open, letting sunlight touch rooms that had known only dust. The men who worked under Corvin did not speak of the shift openly, but their eyes followed the children with something between caution and bewilderment. Merrick, who had once spent his days polishing weapons, now found himself repairing a wooden toy soldier, muttering curses at its delicate joints. Anton adjusted training schedules so that no gunfire would echo near the West Wing. Rose walked the ground slower, listening for nightmares instead of intruders. None of them would have chosen this. None of them wanted it. But still, none of them left. One afternoon, Mira followed Corvin downstairs. Not because she was asked or told, but because she moved now like a shadow near him, the way someone who has known fear attaches to the one person who didn't turn away. The main hall was colder than the West Wing, lit by high stone windows and tall iron lamps. A long table filled the room, and at it sat 3 men in expensive suits, glasses of untouched wine in front of them. They were men who made decisions that changed districts, men who gave orders others did not question, men who believed themselves powerful. Mira watched from the doorway, half hidden, teddy bear in hand. Corvin took his seat at the head of the table. Not with force, not with ceremony, he simply sat, and the room adjusted to him. Anton stood behind him, hands clasped, posture calm. Rose was near the window, unreadable. Marek leaned against the wall, pacing slow and silent. The man across from Corvin, Darian Koss, a shipping magnate with a smile that never reached his eyes, cleared his throat. "There are whispers, Corvin," he began, tone light, almost amused. "Strange ones. Children in your halls, warm rooms in the West Wing, bread ovens working at dawn. I thought your household had no use for softness." Corvin didn't blink. Mira watched his stillness, how it was not passive but controlled, deliberate, the silence of a blade before it moved. Darian smiled wider. "A man with attachments is a man who can be influenced." Anton's jaw tightened, but Corvin did not move. Mira could see it now, clearer than the day she arrived. This man was terrifying without raising his voice. He did not loom or threaten. He simply existed in a way that reminded others they were temporary. When Corvin finally spoke, his voice was soft. "You came to discuss port routes. Not my household. Stay on topic." The temperature in the room shifted. Darian's fingers stilled on his wine glass. His smile twitched. "Yes," he said lightly. "Of course." But something inside him had already broken. Corvin didn't need to raise a hand to crush him. Mira understood then, power was not loud. It was knowing what others feared to say. The negotiation lasted less than 10 minutes. Corvin took control of 2 trade channels and returned 1 unneeded territory, not generosity, but precision. Darian left pale, sweat dampening his collar. The moment the doors closed behind him, Corvin spoke, quiet, but meant for the room. "They saw the children as weakness. They will test us, all of them." Anton nodded. "Not all tests need to be met with violence." "No," Corvin agreed. "But some will." Mira stepped forward then, slowly. "Are we safe?" Corvin looked at her, not as something fragile to protect, but as someone who deserved truth. "We will be," he said, "because we will make it so." He didn't say, "I will protect you." He said, "we." Mira felt something anchor inside her. Not dependence, belonging. Word of the meeting spread. Darian had left the estate shaken, hands trembling enough to need assistance entering his car. Some interpreted the trembling as humiliation. Others recognized it as fear. Rumors deepened. The ghost has not softened. He has chosen a different war. There is nothing more dangerous than a man with something to defend. Enemies who once thought to strike began to reconsider, but some were foolish. Those were the first to disappear, not publicly, not violently, quietly, without spectacle. The city understood the message. The Alessio syndicate had not become merciful, it had become purposeful. The difference mattered. That night, Corvin stood at the balcony overlooking the courtyard where children now played during the day. The stone railing was cold beneath his hands. Mira approached, Eldon beside her, small fingers laced with hers. "You said, 'We protect those no one else will,'" she said. Corvin inclined his head. "Yes." Mira looked out at the dark city beyond the walls. "That's a hard promise." "It is," Corvin agreed. Eldon, who had spoken only in whispers until then, looked up at Corvin and said, soft but steady, "We'll help." The words were small, but they were enough. Corvin did not kneel this time. He didn't need to. The vow had already been made, not with words, but with the life he was reshaping. The estate, once a fortress of ghosts, was becoming a shield with teeth, and the city was beginning to understand. This was not softness. This was war with a heart. The kind that does not break, the kind that does not surrender, the kind that burns. The seasons began to change, though no one marked them on a calendar. They felt it instead, in the way sunlight lingered longer on the stone floors, in how the laughter of children no longer sounded cautious, but full, bright, unguarded, in the way the men who once moved like shadows now paused when a child tugged lightly on their coat, asking to be lifted or spun or simply listened to. The Alessio estate, once a citadel of silence, now breathed. The West Wing was no longer an unused corridor of locked doors and dust. It had become the heart of the estate, filled with warm lamps, worn storybooks, blankets with uneven stitching, the faint scent of soup and bread drifting down the hallways. Every morning, Mira raced Eldon across the courtyard. At first, Eldon had only walked, slow and cautious, as though the ground might dissolve beneath him. But now he ran, barefoot on cool grass, laughter bubbling up like something that had been waiting a very long time to exist. Mira had grown, too, not just taller but brighter. Her hair was no longer tangled. Her eyes no longer held that constant flinch, that silent scan for danger. She spoke freely now, not always loudly, but with certainty. One afternoon, Anton found her sitting in the library, helping Eldon sound out words from a children's book. Her voice was soft, patient, steady. "There is no rush," she would whisper. "We have time." Time. Something they had never been given before. Dr. Alara visited weekly, though less often as the months passed. The children were eating well, sleeping well, playing freely. The bruises had faded. The scars remained, but not all scars were visible, and the visible ones were no longer the defining lines of their identity. Merrick carved toys out of scrap wood now, boats, horses, small figures with broad shoulders and tiny swords. He muttered every time a child hugged him, as though he didn't understand why such affection existed, but he never pulled away. Rose built benches under the trees, quiet corners where someone could sit without being alone. Anton began arranging morning lessons, reading, numbers, history, languages spoken across neighboring borders. The children learned quickly. Trauma had once sharpened them to survive. Now it sharpened them to grow. And Corvin, the ghost, moved through these hallways as though relearning his own home. His steps were still silent. His presence still carried weight, but something in him had shifted in the way shadows softened at dawn. He did not laugh, but he listened. He did not smile, but his silence no longer felt like winter. At dusk, on the 6th month after the warehouse raid, Corvin stood on the balcony overlooking the city. The sun was low, burning gold and amber across the skyline, turning rooftops into silhouettes. The wind moved through the cypress trees below, carrying the faint sound of children playing in the courtyard. His hands rested on the stone railing. His posture was still, but not rigid. Still, but present. Behind him, small footsteps approached, soft, familiar. Mira. She didn't speak at first. She came to stand beside him, resting her teddy bear on the railing, the seams now faded from months of being held tightly every night. Eldon followed, quieter, leaning gently against Corvin's side, not afraid of the contact now, simply comfortable. They watched the city together, the city that had abandoned them, the city that had once belonged to Corvin in fear alone, the city that now had no idea how deeply the balance of power had changed. After a long quiet, Mira spoke. "Are we safe now?" Her voice wasn't afraid. It simply wanted truth. Corvin did not look away from the skyline. "No," he said softly. "Not always." Mira nodded, because she had never expected safety to be something permanent or simple. She had learned very young that safety was not a place. It was a person, or people, or a promise. Corvin continued, "But we fight for safety now. Together. Not because we believe the world will be kind to us." His voice lowered slightly, deepened. "But because we will be kind to each other." Mira breathed in, slow and steady. Eldon leaned closer. A breeze lifted the ends of Corvin's coat and carried the scent of pine and smoke. "Together," Mira repeated. Corvin turned his head just slightly, just enough to see her, to acknowledge the weight of that single word. This was no adopted family by blood. This was something deeper, born of survival, choice, and the quiet vow made the night Mira stumbled through iron gates and asked the most feared man in the city to care. Children's laughter rose from below, playful, unafraid. It echoed along stone corridors where once only footsteps of enforcers had sounded. Power had not softened here. It had changed direction. Corvin Alessio had not become a savior. He had become something the city had no name for yet. A guardian forged from the same fire that once forged fear. A ruler whose house held both shadows and shelter. A man who knew that monsters existed, and who chose to become the monster that hunted other monsters. If a child ran to him now, crying, terrified, alone, he would not turn away, he would not hesitate. He would burn the world before he let harm touch what stood under his protection. The city would learn that in time. Some already whispered it. Some would test it. Some would regret ever asking the question. Mira reached out and placed her small hand over Corvin's, not seeking reassurance, but offering it. The last light of day settled over them. Corvin, Mira, Eldon, standing at the edge of a kingdom built not from fear, but from the unspoken vow that no child under these walls would ever be abandoned again. The estate was no longer silent, and neither was Corvin's legacy. It had found a voice. It had found a future. It had found its children. If this story has your attention, hit that subscribe button and let us know where in the world you're watching from. Every story we tell connects the past to the present, and we'd love to have you with us for the next one.